This is a call to order the reconvened June 3rd, 2020 regular meeting of the Ducktown Council. It's Wednesday afternoon, June 10th at 3 o'clock. We have a single item today that is going to be the discussion working session of the 2021 full year budget. And this is a working session between the council and staff. There'll be no comments coming in from the public. Before we start, I'd like to do a quick roll call of the council and the manager. I'm Don Kingston.
Monica Thibodeau, Mayor Pro Tem.
Rob Mooney, Councilman.
Sandy Whitman, Council.
Nancy Cavanis, Council.
Chris Layton, Town Manager.
Thank you. We're going to start today with an overview by Town Manager Chris Layton, and then we will go through the budget as normal, looking at all of the entries in there. Chris, if you would start, please.
Sure, thank you. So, a few housekeeping items first. At your place, you should have a copy of some handouts. I just want to tell you what those are real quick. One are some initial recommended changes from what I presented. I'll go over those in a second. The next three sheets are the 5-year forecast with those changes. And then the next sheet, which is very busy, and my intent is to go through this so you can understand it, is specifically related to the MSDs and various options for MSDs, specifically looking at variations of scenarios if we don't get any grant money and have to fund this ourselves, and then a scenario with a different example of how the debt service could be paid, and how the MSDs could be put in place. That's different, just a variation of what my recommendation was in the budget. So I'll go over those, and then on the third sheet, there are a variety of different scenarios. The top is just looking at if council wished to adopt a tax rate that was higher than the revenue neutral rate, what those changes could be, how much additional revenue we could expect, and if we did that, if the council opted to go that route, there's a scenario that shows kind of the bottom line, what impact that would have on our shared revenues and everything going forward. Likewise, for each of the examples of the MSDs scenarios, there are impacts with shared revenues going forward, and so this sheet shows what all those impacts could be going forward. And I'll go over this in more detail, but I wanted to let you know that that's what this information is. In talking with the mayor, the intent was to sort of go through the budget, and then once we went through the budget, then focus on the MSD sheets and in those various scenarios. So frankly, so we could get through some of the other discussion before we got bogged down with some of that detail. First things first, a couple of housekeeping matters. There's a reason why this is called a draft budget, and it's not just because of the fact that it's ultimately council's budget and council gets to adopt it and make any changes that the council wishes to make with it, but also because sometimes there are mistakes, and when you have a document of this size, sometimes you come across errors that you didn't catch. One of those errors was reduction that we did as part of the budget. This says 5%. We meant to say 0.5%. So going forward, the final document will change all of that to 0.5%. The other item was, was an error on my part. And if you refer to the first sheet that says recommended changes, the ad valorem taxes, not the MSDs, but this is just the taxes. In the budget, it currently says $3,721,204. That was an earlier calculation that I did, and I never caught that I didn't correct that. The real number should be $3,662,390, which is a reduction in the budget of $58,814. So the revenues will need to be adjusted to decrease that specific item by $58,814. Where I'm proposing to make up that difference, the first item is in streets, repairs, and maintenance. Originally, I had that at $30,000. My recommendation is to reduce that by $10,000 to $20,000. The second item where I'd want to capture that difference is in parks, the miscellaneous events. The original budget was $144,400. I'm recommending decreasing that by $38,861 to $105,539. With July events being canceled, it's not going to hamstring us in any appreciable way. And then the last, I had the fund balance at the end of the year at $9,953 contribution to the fund balance. We'd zero that out, and so when you add up the $10,000, the $38,861, and the $9,953, that equals $58,814, and that's where we capture that money back. Yes.
Thank you for that. I'm trying to find the 3721204. Wouldn't it just be under ad valorem taxes, the first line? Where it says on the budget page 3591618. I just wanted to make sure I could reference it.
Yeah. So if you get to page 10.
I see it. I'm in the current year. Didn't see. I didn't go far enough over here.
Okay.
The estimate coming year. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, just in the wrong column.
And so those are my opening comments.
Chris, just a clarification. Changes on the sheet you just handed out are not necessarily incorporated in this book, right? These are the old numbers.
No. We're going to have to go through and make all the changes to I wasn't going to inundate you as a draft budget with all the additional sheets.
Yep.
And one thing, just for Rob and for Sandy, the way the budget gets adopted is when council comes to a consensus on the budget, and we're ready to go bring it to adoption. An actual ordinance, a budget ordinance, will be brought forward that will provide all the categories, not all the line items, but all the categories, and council will adopt that budget ordinance by category, and so everything in here gets included in that, but it's an ordinance that we're not expecting to adopt the budget today, and so we haven't prepared that yet. But it'll be a budget ordinance document that you'll see that'll mirror what's in this document.
It'll look like sort of that budget summary page.
Similar, but it'll be it'll look more like it'll have more categories on the budget summary page. It'll have each department listed and not just general government, not just public safety. It'll have each individual department labeled.
Do you want to make any additional comments on revenue at this time, Chris?
No, I guess the one thing I will say is that in terms of, in terms of COVID and in terms also of sort of looking ahead to FY 2022, in terms of COVID, as I mentioned when I presented the budget, this is a slightly more optimistic view than some of the other towns, at least initially we're talking about. But there is a factor in here for, for lower shared revenues, specifically occupancy tax and transfer tax, just simply factoring some kind of margin of error for COVID-related setbacks. Yes, Monica.
So thank you for bringing that up. So it wasn't really the when you didn't go super aggressive on occupancy or sales, it wasn't because of the other towns. Sometimes we have to guess about that.
That's, there's a factor in there, but that guesswork is more for FY22 and on.
Got it.
Because,
right.
Because you're trying to put together, while the budget's going together, you're trying to project out. By the time we get here, the specific, we have a really good idea about what the specific levy is going to be unless people raise taxes.
Okay.
And that's a nice segue into the second piece, which is with the revenue neutral rate, or with the other towns, everyone has recommended, every manager has recommended, and at least 3 have adopted their budgets with the revenue neutral rate. No one's recommended anything beyond the revenue neutral rate as far as the other towns are concerned. So I don't expect in FY 2022, in FY22, I don't expect there to be much this year that is going to have a substantial impact on our shared revenues in 2022, and as far as decreasing our percentage now.
And I'll just add one comment to the occupancy tax, which was very unknown when Chris was putting this together, but you've probably read and seen that vacation rentals and the interest in the Outer Banks is all-time high, and that everybody, all of my information and competitive analysis, et cetera, shows that everybody is up in the 90s for occupancy pretty much through the summer, which is sometimes June can be a little bit laggy because of late schools, and so it looks to be a very strong year for occupancy tax, which correlates to sales tax, and everyone's going to be busy with a lot of visitors, but hopefully everyone will behave themselves.
So Monica, is that a forecast that's like through Labor Day, or is it a forecast through the end of the year?
Well, our company always had a strong fall going on anyway, but yes, we've seen it all the way through the fall.
Okay.
A lot of ours, April rentals, we moved to same time next year or into the fall, depending on how cooperative the homeowners were. So our fall started filling up quite a bit, and then, but we already had a pretty full fall, and a lot of companies are really gaining a lot of traction through fall. So I think it's going to be a very healthy year. Healthy, I shouldn't say that, right? A very strong rental year, which is, some people couldn't have predicted maybe, especially when you were putting these numbers together. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't want to be too bullish, but because anything can happen and everything has seemed to happen, but bookings are very strong throughout the Outer Banks.
Chris, just one question on the revenue as you go out and forecast. For grants for beach nourishment, we've taken into account 2.5 million the year after next, and the county paying, right? And we have not taken into account FEMA in this draft budget?
That's correct. Of course, this is this budget is, a snapshot of 2021, and at this point, we're still working as far as the nourishment project. We're still working on getting FEMA money for that, and the grant has been submitted, and we haven't gotten any updates on that yet, so we don't know where that stands. Of course, as we further that discussion, what I presented was an option that basically assumed that we were going to get either FEMA or the grant, and I know there's some discussion about whether that's a sound way to approach it or not, but that's the way the budget was put together. And also with a 50-50 split between MSDA and MSDB, I know there's going to be some discussion on whether that should be the split or not, and what I've provided in my scenarios are just some options to look at. Ultimately, it's what the rate is what council wants to make it, and you could zero it out. You could divvy it up any way you felt was appropriate. You could add additional general fund dollars to that. But one thing that you can't do is you can't alter the project area. You have an email there that says, some people in Skimmer Way want to be removed from the project. The council could do that, but in order to do that, you have to change the actual MSD enabling resolutions to do that. And in order to do that, we would have to wait another, you could do it now, but if you do that, you can't collect any MSDs. So if that's the direction you want to go and you want to actually change the MSDs, then we have to go through a whole nother process to establish the MSDs. Does that make sense? Yep. So you could put a rate down to 0, or you could change, how much you want to collect. But if you do anything other than that and you want to change the actual MSDs, then we have to start from scratch.
Which would require some consulting, and probably, in addition to time, it would cost money. We don't do that ourselves, do we?
We wouldn't be able to collect any MSDs this year. We would have to reestablish that, go through the whole ordinance process again, public hearing process, all of that. When we started down this road, the intent was, once we start the project, we're going to maintain it and we're going to continue with that. Doesn't mean council can't change its mind. But that was the intent. And the re-nourishment and the maintenance of the project is just that. We're not expanding the project, we're not reducing it, we're maintaining the project that we put in place in 2017.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any questions from council regarding revenues before we move on?
I guess one other thing I would point out, anything on the restricted intergovernmental with the grants, I mean, that's tied directly to expenditures. So, you can't look at the grants in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. If you decide that you don't want to do the pedestrian project or the living shoreline or the erosion project, again, council's welcome to do that, but if you take away that money, you got to take away the revenue side of it from the grant side too.
I do have one more question on occupancy tax if we're on the revenue page and we're about to leave it. Specifically, where you say under occupancy tax for this year, you have 1,335, 123. Is that still what you're projecting? Under estimated entire year occupancy tax?
For right now, yes. I haven't updated the projections because I expect it to be higher than that, but the last occupancy tax we got was for April. And so that's not giving me any idea of where we're going to be because it was really low.
We had zero sales tax. It really messed up our software.
Oh yeah, I mean, I
Didn't know what to do with it except on the labor in our whole system.
when you get it and you're like, well, at least we got something, which was kind of the attitude I had with the occupancy. The actual to dates and the estimated, I mean, there's snapshots of where we're at that time, and I do the best I can with that. What will happen, and you all will recall this, what I'll do is I will do an end of, kind of an end of the year update on the financial report that I give you every month. I will update that with with updated projections, just to give us some kind of idea as we go forward.
Thanks, because I know that, the 1,417 is somewhat lower than what we had last year. Maybe it's going to come in about what we're going to get this year. I think there's a little room there. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think that if we didn't have to deal with COVID, my projections were more like in the 1.5 million for occupancy tax, but obviously with COVID that sucked some of that revenue away. We couldn't, when all this was prepared, even in the middle of May, we couldn't really project how frankly the visitorship
That's exactly the point.
was gonna bounce back the way it did.
And we did have, and it starts with June, but July. It starts with July for next year. Okay, so hard to know.
Yeah.
I don't like to put too many eggs in that basket, but I think there's a little room there. So just want to make that point.
Chris, before we go to the detail, do you want to make any comments on the expenditures? Or do you want to just wait until as we go through it, page by page?
I guess the one thing I will say about expenditures, again, I've tried to highlight, what I consider to be the largest items of interest. I guess from that perspective, I don't have a lot to say about expenditures. I mean, that I haven't already said. I'm glad to repeat myself, but I think it's pretty much spelled out. I've tried to highlight and provide funding where I felt it could be both justified and accomplished without any kind of tax increase. We are limited on expenditure side, because of COVID concerns and also revenue neutral rate. Every year, I know there are some people who dispute this, but every year I go into the budget without without trying to recommend or even suggest a tax increase. I'm cognizant of those issues, and I try to prepare a budget that I think is pragmatic and meets the council's goals as I see them. I don't always get it right, and once again, this is your budget. I gave you something to work with. It's your budget now to do as you wish.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any general questions on expenditures? If not, we're going to move on and we'll start going through, starting with the governing body.
I just have a question about the suggestions with the delays. So so the 4 things that we could potentially delay that are outlined here, if we make a decision at the outset to put a pause, that money goes into restricted?
No.
General fund?
It doesn't change.
Doesn't change.
So what I am suggesting is that if the council adopts this budget, we know that those items, we've already hit some of the town events, but we
Right.
know that the other items, council has to approve contracts
Right.
for those. So as we work through this, and we know that, it's probably going to be, we may start bidding out in the August-September timeframe, but we wouldn't expect any contracts to come forward and probably until October timeframe. We know we'll have a pretty good idea, and then, so council will have an opportunity at that point to look at the projections and read the tea leaves and say, do we think we can continue with this project and afford it this year?
Okay.
And then, as you say, the offset on any grants, so that would have been basically.
Right.
Yeah, if we don't do the project, the issue with the grants is a moot point.
Right.
But I don't want you to think that you can cut, a portion out of it and still accept the same amount. I mean, the NIFWIF grant is a 50-50 grant. So if you wanted to cut $300,000 out of that, then we're not going to get the same amount of money on the revenue side.
There's no other question. Let's move on to the governing body. Chris, we're looking for a decrease in workers' comp. Where is health insurance? Does that come in elsewhere?
No, health insurance is cost allocated by department, and it's done. It's part of the fringe benefits. What comes out of the council budget is workers' comp and the liability insurance. Workman's comp is a decrease in workman's comp is when we have a significant charge to workman's comp. And if an employee goes out for a major item, and we pay for that, and that ends up going on our we get charged for portions of that each year, essentially until we pay that off as part of the workman's comp. We had several major workman's comp issues, and they came off the books last year. So we saw a reduction in workman's comp.
So workers' comp, professional services, travel, printing and binding, insurance and bonding, those all support the entire workforce?
Only some of these are general. The workman's comp and the insurance and bonding is general for the entire town. The rest of the items are specific for council.
So travel, we had a budget and we spent, okay. Got it.
Occasionally, someone will go to a conference or something, and they will ask for mileage or for hotel and that kind of thing. Don goes to conferences, but he gets reimbursed by the league.
By the league.
Or-
Right. I was going to say, he's the one traveling a lot, okay. All right.
If there's nothing more on governing body, we'll move on to administration. Chris, back to my question again about insurance. Now, the fringe is going down. Are we anticipating, I'm assuming fringe is that's health insurance?
Yes. Well, it's not just health insurance, but it's also FICA.
Yeah.
And frequently there are changes. We are, if there are changes in, for example, if we have a family plan and the town pays 75% of a family plan, if someone changes and they go to employee only, that can be a huge reduction. And so we can see fluctuations that way. You know, and also, this year, I've pulled down the FICA slightly to help with to bring it more in line. Previously, I did a straight 10%, and I brought it down to 8% to more closely match the 7.65. I try to account for in our benefits, you know, deviations of percentages here and there, so we don't get caught with a change halfway. This year I made a slight change with that to make sure we were covered in the fringe benefit side of it.
I have a question under capital outlay just for the current year where it says under 5,000, but yet we kind of popped it up to 20,000. Was that several under 5,000s what was that?
Yeah, so, and that hasn't gone forward yet, but that's actually office furniture. And what that is the cubicles that will house Allison, Betsy, and interns. And it's not 20,000; it was 13,000 is the estimated cost of that. But
Kind of going in the middle of the office area.
Any other questions on administration? There being none, let's move on to finance.
That's an easy
It's
one.
pretty straightforward.
once again, this is the cost to collect taxes in the town, and the county, it's 1.5% of what they collect, and the state, as you all know, when you get your registration, they assess the tax at that point. So there's also a cost that the state charges us for that, and that's what this covers.
Chris, is that a lower rate on the real property than in prior years, where it's only at 90%, 90.9?
It can fluctuate based on, we can get a fluctuation based on uncollected taxes, and so, you know, it can vary with various, just with the total. I mean, it's a straight collection, so the variation can be there. It's not a, you know, we could get a large collection from a delinquent tax from 2015, and that's 1.5% of that, and so we can have fluctuations on that.
But we're not dropping off 10%.
No. I mean, there is a slight reduction because of MSDs, because of what I'm proposing with MSDs. So I factored a slight reduction in for that, because we also get charged the 1.5% for that collection.
Yeah. Any other questions? If not, we'll move on to legal.
We don't look for trouble, but sometimes trouble finds us.
Nothing illegal. We'll move on to public buildings.
Actually, can we stop for just a second back to legal?
Yes.
The class action suit, the
Yes.
class actions that against Dare, and everybody, right, we're all named in it?
Which one?
Pick one.
There are two out there right now.
Right.
There's only one that's with the towns in the county.
Okay. So that would, if that goes forward, that would elevate this line item, or?
It all depends on how much time attorneys end up spending on that. Now, we are covered, you know, the League of Municipalities, at least so far, has accepted the case, and so our insurance is paying for, you know, for those legal costs. That could change. I mean, you know, something could change, and we end up having to take some of that over. But and we never know when something else is going to pop up. It always seems to. So, and what you see in there is retainers and room for additional stuff, additional research, additional title, you know, easement stuff, things like that. But if a huge case comes up, you can expect that we'd have to appropriate money to it.
Okay with that? Back to public buildings.
I have one. Chris, is there a reason that we dropped the repairs and maintenance on the buildings from 40 to 25, or is it just for our part-time helper now that he's going to take care of that?
That's almost a dollar for dollar reduction. So under building inspections, the part-time building tech, that 28, it's either 28.8 or 28.5, I think. 25 of that is coming from that repairs and maintenance.
Chris, where's that $450,000 that floats by every year? That would be an appropriate, a supplemental appropriation from the in-budget amendment, so it'd be coming from the fund balance. It's not in this because it's not a factor yet. And we've just been reappropriating that year to year, right?
No, it never got reappropriated because it went back to the fund balance. And we haven't had a need until we get through that process, until we get through the EA process and council makes a determination on next steps. We don't need to appropriate anything until then. And we don't know whether that's going to be, you know, in a couple months or a year. And so no need to do that until it's time.
And the auditors are fine with us appropriating, but then just putting back in the fund balance?
Oh, they love that.
They do?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They love when things go back in the fund balance.
Okay, it's the appropriate way to handle it, great. We have $15,000 appropriated, or budgeted, I should say, for boardwalk repairs, and we haven't spent that much, but that's sort of like an earmark, sort of your general feeling good about it, because we might not sure what's going to happen out there.
Well, exactly, and what we typically do is we will buy, we don't buy a board here, a board there. We buy a pallet at a time that we can address, and with the lumber that we put out there, it's special order because it's a higher level of. I'm not a builder. It's actually even higher than your typical ground treatment lumber, and so we special order it. We'll get it at a pallet at a time, and then we'll pull from that as we have to repair boards. But we also never know where if we're going to have to do major sections at a time, just because of wear. And so 15 is a good number that will cover all the basic maintenance. It's not going to cover if we have a storm and it destroys something. It's not that'll be a supplemental appropriation, probably with FEMA funding attached to it. But this covers, we feel like this is a good target for for what we could reasonably expect on an annual basis. We're maintaining almost a mile of it, so.
Any other questions on that section? If not, we'll move on to information technology.
For the uninitiated, I'll just point out that cable access channel, that's pass-through funds. We get funding, it's called PEG funding, and several years ago, the North Carolina General Assembly got rid of franchises and franchise fees, and instead put in a system where they collect essentially franchise fees at a state level, and they have to specifically be used for governmental or education channels, but they're assigned to a channel based on the funds are assigned to a channel based on the number of entities that are in that channel, and so funding gets on a quarterly basis. Funding comes through, and we have to send that to the in this case to the cable access, the Dare County cable access channel.
And the subsidies and allocation, what is that again?
So the way we divide this is, you can think of the subsidies and allocations is essentially our contract with Shoshin for the support of all of our equipment. And then the fixed charges are things like our website hosting and our GIS software and things of that nature.
Got it.
Chris, just back to cable access again. Where's the revenue offset on that? That's an in and out, right?
Yeah. The cable, that's a good question. Because we never actually get that money, but the auditors make us appropriate it and send it. You would think I'd know that, I'd be able to answer that question, but
We had to stump you somewhere.
yeah.
It must be, it's got to be there somewhere, right? I mean, it doesn't tie into that same number on the income side, 4,200-601.
Yeah, let me follow up on that. Let me follow up on that, because I'm drawing a blank right now.
Okay. Any other questions on information technology? Let's move on to police. Did we just move the requested headcount out 1 year, Chris? The
sorry?
requested headcount for police, did we just move that from 1 year to the next?
Are you looking down at the number of employees?
Well, no, I was actually looking just at the curiosity
forecast.
question, because I know we're looking at potentially 2 people. Did we just move that to the following year?
No, when it comes to personnel, we don't handle that like the CIP.
All right.
We don't, that would be a request that would be, I would assume, would be made again at some point, but it's not like the CIP where it gets automatically pushed.
I have a question on salaries. How do we bring that down $90,000?
Oh, from requested to recommended?
Yes.
Because 2 positions were, requested was, included 2 positions, and 2 positions were, I'm not recommending 2 positions.
Okay. So in the count, the 15 count in the bottom is,
Yeah, that was, the requested was 15 of what was requested by Chief Cudo was, and that's actually 14 plus 2 part-time positions, so 15 would be the full-time equivalent. And he actually, he actually requested the 14. This would actually be, his request was 15. We could change it to 13. Which would have been my recommended, but we don't have a line here for recommended. So
I guess my question was the same as Don's then. It's not, we had 15 here. Next year, it's still going to be either 13 or 15 if they recommended 2. Right? When we finish this budget, that's going to be 13.
yes,
Correct?
yes,
So Don's question was the same as mine then, I guess. If we don't carry them over, so when we see the final budget, that'll be 13. Next year, they'll have to ask for the 2 again.
correct.
Well, while we're talking about next year instead of, 2 years from now, your estimateds do go up about about 100,000, and they stay up, and then they go up a little bit more. Is that just because of capital CIP items? On page 28? I'm not trying to get into the future here too much, but you're...
Yeah. There's going to be a fluctuation based on, there will be fluctuations based on growth of, we factor in a 1.5% and a 3% bonus and 10% for medical insurance, but the bulk of that is going to be, that's the entire budget. And so the bulk of that is going to be CIP items likely, and in this particular case, it's probably, I think the police is asking for 2 or 3 new vehicles, and so I think that's, if I remember correctly, that's
right.
probably the bulk of that.
It goes up about 150.
Yeah, and I think that's that plus radios is what's in the CIP, which I suspect is what's driving that.
And the capital outlay back on page 29 that was reduced by 150 is because of 2 vehicles?
Yeah, the 2 vehicles.
And equipment.
MDTs and the other equipment associated with new officers, including the Axon, additional Axon charges and things like that.
So it's like 90 plus 150, so about 240 to outfit 2 officers, or the equivalent of 2 officers in this case.
Depending on how you handle vehicles and that kind of thing. And I'm sure Chief Cudo would be glad to answer any of those questions if you need additional information.
You okay with that?
That's everything I had.
Any additional questions on police? Move on to fire.
And once again, you have the requested 15. Donna, in her budget, had requested 3 additional firefighter EMTs. I have not recommended those.
So I have the same answer again, right?
Yeah, that doesn't automatically,
Okay.
I mean, it would be a request that would have to be made next year as well.
And the travel on the, we haven't done a lot of travel yet this year, but we're expecting to travel $4,000 worth, and then we're recommending that for next year.
Yeah, what frequently happens is sometimes the fire department will, the volunteer department will pay for certain travel, and sometimes they'll pay for certain travel up front and then ask for reimbursement for that. Right now, one of the major travel items that Donna has is with IAFC, and they're covering it. They're covering her travel.
So we may not spend the 4.
Yeah, it's, this year we got to COVID and they hadn't done much, we hadn't paid for much travel, and so I wasn't expecting us to have to, obviously with COVID, we weren't going to be traveling, so.
Does the Duck Volunteer Fire Department pay for some of the maintenance on the engines? That seems like a low number, too.
I'll start. The Duck Volunteer Fire Department owns the engines.
All right.
And so they're responsible for the maintenance of those.
Okay.
The other maintenance would be the vehicles that the town has purchased, and that's essentially the chief's vehicle and the deputy chief's vehicle.
Good. Any additional questions on fire?
Supplemental retirement was a little bit of a differential there. Is that just personnel related, I guess?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Let's move on to inspections. We are adding headcount here.
And this is where you see the part-time, which is my recommendation for the building tech position. And as you saw in public buildings, there was a reduction of 25 there, so it's almost dollar for dollar.
Chris, I had a question on what kind of benefits a part-time employee gets. Would those be the same for the new building person and the new firefighter in terms of benefits?
The only benefit, I say the only, when someone is classified under our system as permanent part-time, and the building tech would fall under this, and one of the part-time firefighters is likely going to be offered this as well as a more of a permanent part-time. The only benefit they get is enrollment in the local government retirement system. They don't get medical, they don't get health insurance. I mean, they don't get health insurance, they don't get 401k benefits, anything like that. And to be a member of the local governmental employees retirement system, you have to contribute 6% of your earnings to that, and then it's matched by the town by, I think our match now for non-law enforcement is 7.75%. And so those costs come into supplemental retirement.
The employee any employee has to contribute up to has to contribute 6% to get the benefit, and then the town contributes. Matches it up to?
No, we don't have an option. It's actuarially based.
Okay.
And for police officers, it's a higher amount, but for all other employees, right now, I believe it's 7.75%.
Of what?
Police officers, I
Of
think
what?
That's for to be a part of the state retirement program. The local governmental employees retirement system is the state retirement program that we're a part of.
Okay, I'm not going to get too granular on this, but they contribute up to 6%.
No, they have to contribute 6%.
They contribute 6%, so they're enrolled.
And then we have
We
to match it.
dollar for dollar.
We match it by an actuarial basis. So the state looks at the entire system and what it takes to keep it afloat, because it's pretty much the state retirement system, and then they come out with a percentage of what we are required to match.
Okay. I'm going to leave it there.
I'm not sure.
That's okay. I got it. We're told what to contribute.
Yes, this is a state program.
It might be the same across the board, or it might be based on.
The only difference is law enforcement is treated differently than all other employees. They have a higher contribution rate.
Okay.
And I don't know if this is part of your your confusion. In addition, law enforcement has what's called the special separation allowance. And so if you retire from the state, if you retire as a police officer in North Carolina, and you aren't 62, I believe, then from the date you retire and your age that you retire until you reach that other age, there's a requirement that we pay an additional supplement. We haven't had to experience that yet, but we will now. So
We pay into the program, or we pay it right to the person?
we pay it right to the person.
Hey, Chris, on that $25,000 for the part-time person, or 28, I'm sorry, do you feel that since you've had him on, that you've saved that money that you'll be paying him?
Yeah, frankly, we have been able, I feel very, very comfortable right now with our ability to handle both small and mid-sized projects, maintenance projects around the town. And I think that with the hourly rate that was being charged before, and this pretty much matching that, we're able to keep up with items in a much more cost-effective way than, in a much more timely way than if we were having to bid out each individual little project. I mean, if we have pickets missing on the you know, on the boardwalk, you know, I can just ask him to go take care of that, and I don't have to go through this process where, you know, we have 10 pickets missing before it's worthwhile for anyone to go out there to actually do that. That's a simple example, but you know, that's what I'm talking about.
Plus, it's the institutional knowledge that he's gaining for working with the building inspector.
Exactly. I mean, again, the whole idea is that, you know, that he will be, you know, he will also be helping. I mean, the reason why he's in the building inspections department is because he's also going to be going to classes to assist with inspections, and to, you know, it's some succession planning.
Should we have some education in there, or is that too early?
Well, that's really under the travel.
Okay.
Travel and education. You're usually traveling for the education, so that's where we put that.
Half of K's salary is in here, too?
All of K's salary is, this is half of Sandy's salary. All of K's salary is actually in community development.
Well, how do we get two people on?
Because you have one full-time, half of Sandy, and then the
Oh,
part-time.
half Sandy's in there?
Not Sandy Whitman.
Okay. I knew it was a half.
Chris, I have a question just backing up on the supplemental retirement that you just explained. Does the police budget have to be reworked to reflect what you said?
I haven't had time to run any of those numbers yet.
Okay.
My hope is that it can be absorbed, but you know, I expect it can be absorbed.
Okay.
But I haven't run those numbers yet.
Thanks.
Let's move on to ocean rescue. Contracted. We buy the radios from Merck.
No, all radios were cut this year out of the budget.
What's the capital outlay?
Yeah, that was radios, but the
Oh,
radios
zero.
were eliminated from requested.
We got the wrong column.
I mean, from recommended, I'm sorry.
Had we been funding those before?
There, in the CIP, there is a change that's happening in 2025. 2025, right? And that's going to require us to replace all public safety radios for everyone. It's going to be a big ticket item, and we had originally through the CIP included those in the CIP by department, so we could buy a few each year until 2025. Those were the purchase of the radios for this year were a casualty of lack of revenue. So that includes that includes fire, that includes police, that includes ocean rescue. And so the way I handled it is that I shifted those costs and incorporated them into the last year, So next year, we're hoping to be able to get some radios, and we'll continue there. And then at some point, we're going to have to make up for those that were from this year. And I put them into the fifth year of the CIP, or 2025. So
I added it on the back. Could I ask a question about the radios? So the new radios that we might get next year will work with the old radios? And second part of my question, are they going to still work in 2025 with whatever they decide to do? Because I know radios have been a real headache.
I'll let
And
the
expensive.
radio users answer that question.
So yes, any of the new radios that we've been purchasing are compliant. In fact, they knew that this was going to be a program that they needed to work in over several years, so there's no switch that's going to be thrown where the radios wouldn't work. So we've had the benefit of having some time to transition. As an example, this is a new radio that we purchased, and it is compliant.
Great. Thank you. Good to know.
And then to that, all the older ones that are not compliant, they have to be removed. So those are the ones that we're trying to replace by that time.
By 2025.
But we've been walking in that direction.
Good. I hope they work better than the last bunch we bought, those 800s or whatever they were.
Well, they're not changing the 800 system. They're just
Oh, sorry.
changing the radios.
Okay, I'm not going to ask. Yeah, it's not my area. They know what they're doing or not. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Let's move on to streets.
Oh, yeah. This is where I really would like to find more room for more street repair. I've mentioned this to Chris personally.
I think what you're really looking at is you want to focus on that capital outlay over 5,000. Monica had expressed to me that she would love to be able to find additional money for sidewalks and Sanderling, and right now 100,000 is recommended for that. You all have gotten the same emails I've gotten where there's a desire to increase, increase the rate at which those sidewalks are repaired, and this actually replaced, and that's where this money comes from. So, I mean, that's where this project, that's where that funding is.
Chris, in the next 3 years, as I remember seeing something that there was $100,000 a year, and then after 3 years, it would be 100% concrete up there then?
Yeah, that's what we're looking for.
How many feet do we get per $100,000? How's that sound?
We roughly get, and it can vary depending on how much stormwater is worked into that, but usually we can get 800 to 850 linear feet per 100,000. The two worst areas in Sanderling, there are two areas that that certainly arguably and people argue it much better than I can, are in bad shape because of root intrusion and things of that nature. We estimate that the two sections, if we could get another 100,000 to do two sections at roughly 850 linear feet, that would knock out the very worst. Not solve everything, but would knock out the very worst of those areas. It was just something that I couldn't find in this. I mean, I couldn't find with what I was working with.
Chris, would those be sections that are next to each other? Would that be, in other words, about 1,600 linear feet for the 200 that would be like, or would it look a little patchy?
It's probably best for me not to get too far ahead of myself and ask Sandy
Okay.
to answer that
I didn't know if you-
question.
yeah.
She's listening on Zoom. I'm sure we'll hear her pitter patter of little feet in a second, and she'll be down here and she can answer that question. They are not totally contiguous, but they're also.
I gotta go.
I'll let her answer.
Okay. Under the little pink one, you can relate to that. You've been a champion of the sidewalks since day one, and I sound like the old wise person, but whatever, but that's how we founded. Duck was, able to survive with the little sidewalk tax that we had before we were incorporated as a kind of some seed money to get us through the first year. So anyway, sidewalks have always been a foundation of our town, and I think a safety issue is important, and that's something that I would really like to give more to and get that going. Here comes Sandy. And on that note,
Sandy?
Took you so long.
Yes, it would be continuous. We're looking at the section from
oh, your mic's not on.
Yes, the section would be from, we finished a section in station south of Station Bay, and we would take that concrete sidewalk from that point to Martin Lane, and then from Martin Lane south to where we finished at Waxwing a couple years ago. Actually, Waxwing might have been last year, and Station Bay was this past year. So the years are kind of jumbling all together, but it would be 1,600 feet contiguous. And I would just want to clarify Sandy's that said it was a 3-year process. There were 3 lines in that email, but the third one was actually another 1,600 linear feet, so that would end up being an extra year. So if we left them at each approximately 800 to 850 linear feet, it would take 5 fiscal years.
That's what I thought.
If we combine them, then you're obviously going to speed up time, but it was looking like 5 total.
5 as it stands with 100 a year.
5 as it stands with 100 a year, yes.
Okay.
I'm going to hang out till you finish this one.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thanks. I don't know, I'm going back to the income, not to do your work for you, but if we just up the occupancy and sales tax by about 3%, that gives us 100. Just saying. I ran a couple quick numbers while we were talking, but I just would love to see council have more appetite for sidewalks, and I'll just let everybody just live with that idea for a while, and I'm sure we'll have lots more to talk about.
Sandy, when there's a repaving, because the sidewalk has gotten really corrupted from root intrusion, is there something, do they do something to try to not have that happen again?
That's one of the reasons why we're going to concrete.
Okay.
Concrete will withstand root intrusion a lot longer and a lot more effectively than asphalt will.
Yeah, okay.
And then even if there is root intrusion, we're not talking about replacing a huge linear section. We're talking about an 8 to 10 foot section, which can be done by our people.
Okay, thanks.
And it lasts longer, right? The concrete lasts longer.
The lifespan for asphalt is going to be about 20 years. The lifespan for concrete is going to be probably closer to 30 to 50. Depending on conditions. Obviously, if it's sitting underwater all the time, we're going to not have as long a lifespan, but we're trying to do things that are going to keep it from being underwater as well.
Monica, how much additional money are we looking for? Are you looking for an additional 100 or?
At least.
Frankly, if we don't seek to do another 800, you start getting into the piecemeal. I mean, I think if the desire is to figure out how to find another 100,000 to put at that, if the desire is to put more money at that, I think we need to look at 100,000
least
so that we
100,000,
can
right.
get so we can do that, the whole section, and not just, and not just a portion of it.
I might also add that as the project gets larger, we get better economies of scale, so it may not end up being 200, but, without knowing definitively what the bids are going to come in at, there could be some savings once we get the bids back.
And how realistic would it be to do the entire thing in 1 year? What the rest of it, the 5-year plan in 1 year? Is that possible, even just based on?
I would say that you're looking at, I would question whether there are any companies that can handle that much within the time frame that we have to have it done.
Okay.
With the other contracts that they may have in place already.
Good information.
I think that 1,600 linear feet is like probably the limit that we're going to get accomplished within the time frame that we have.
Good to know. Thank you.
What is that time frame, Sandy?
Well, October to March, April,
So,
May at the latest. Last year, we ran into issues with the village, and that pushed the sidewalk that was being replaced in Sanderling back into June and July, and it becomes very dangerous and problematic at that point.
right.
So we're talking about a 6-month time frame.
And I agree with you. I think we need to try to figure out a way to do that. Because
The 1,600?
Yeah.
Yeah.
especially if we're going to realize some savings by doing 2 sections at once.
Right. And maybe with that, we can knock it out in 2 years as opposed to
Well,
5.
the other thing in Sandy and I had this, Sandy and I had this discussion. We feel that if we could do those 2 sections, that the vast majority of the major safety concerns we could knock out. It's not replacing the whole thing, the whole area, that whole area with a new sidewalk, but it is getting at
the dangerous parts.
yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with Chris. Like the 2 sections that we're talking about that we've been working on a plan for are really bad. And I'm talking like Savannah and I walked them, and one section has like 70 cracks within the stretch that we're like, yeah, this is dangerous. Beyond those 2, we've got 3 other sections, but the sections from like Oyster Catcher to Blue Heron are going to be the next worst because there's a lot of trees. But then you have from Blue Heron to Waxwing, you have a pond that extends almost a good portion of that area.
Right.
So you don't have any root intrusion. So that section of the sidewalk is actually doing well. So we've got the 2 that we're dealing with now, and then we probably would go to Oyster Catcher to Blue Heron, and if there was, funding for a full 1,600 feet, because that's what that section ends up being, surprisingly. It's kind of bizarre, but, we could knock out the difficult sections in 2 years if you had 200 each year.
Great to know. Thank you. Great
And Sandy,
information.
that section from Oyster Catcher to Blue Heron, I know that there was some replacement that happened there, I think, 2 years ago. Are we going to have somebody design that a little bit better, because
So
the
that
amount
was-
of water,
that was-
that gets left there
That
is
was actually
ridiculous.
like, it was a big project from Flight Drive to Oyster Catcher, and there was a little bit of money left, and we didn't want to see that money go to waste.
Okay.
So we started looking at some severe root intrusion, and that's the only reason that was done.
Okay.
There was not a lot of money spent on it, and it was before the council decided to go with concrete, and before our engineer actually said, you might want to think about this. Once he made that recommendation and council was presented that's the direction that we've been heading since then.
Okay, because it's just the amount of standing water that gets left there for long periods of time is crazy.
And that will,
And that's
like I
one of
said,
the-
that's why that's going to be one of the next
That's
sections.
one of the safety things, because you have all these kids that they won't ride their bikes through the water, they won't walk through there, and they step out onto 12 to get around it, and that's dangerous.
Thanks.
Chris, you want to take that as a takeaway, like to double that to 100,000 and see how we would fit that into next year's budget?
Sure. I will,
I mean, it may be a,
I guess I'll massage the numbers to find $100,000.
Well, Monica has a crystal ball over there.
But I was just thinking,
Well,
I
there's
don't
gonna
know
be-
if you like 3% on the income there, but I was just, that was before we even got to the 100. I just noticed it work when I was going back to kind of closer to what we got last year.
I can look at some of my projections and see if I'm as comfortable.
Yeah, double check those for me because they were just done now on my calculator.
let's move on to sanitation. Couple of contracts here.
Thanks, Sandy. On the disaster debris cleanup, we're just not budgeting it unless we need it.
Yeah, because typically that's FEMA funded.
Okay.
Any questions on that? Beach nourishment.
Well, you know what, let me say something about trash real quick. I know I'm doing all the talking. You guys,
No, that's all right.
we're going pretty well, though. I'm not holding us up too much, I hope. I just want to thank the town of Duck for the great programs that we have on sanitation. I just want to take a minute to recognize it. Having the curbside recycling and the quantity or the number of pickups that we have throughout the year, I think is something that as a town, we're very fortunate to have, and I really appreciate it. I see the differences in the different towns just in property management, but also as a business owner, the fact that we have commercial pickup for recycling and trash is huge, and I just want to thank the town for that. It's really a great benefit for the business community, and it keeps us looking tidy, and I just am thankful. So that's all I got.
You will have a contract for recycling, a renewal coming forward. Our current contract expires on September 30th of this year. We've already initiated discussions with Tidewater Fiber. They're getting us a term sheet, and we'll determine our focus at that point. Tidewater Fiber has their own MRF, not dog upstairs, but their sorting system, and for recyclables. So we don't have to worry about talking about whether that is going to an incinerator or not, or whether the majority of it is being recycled or going to a landfill, because the vast majority, I think they're saying they're able to recover about 80, even with the markets the way they are now, they're able to recover around 80% of the recyclables they collect, which with the current market is huge, and they expect that to improve.
It's good news.
Beach protection.
On beach protection professional services, it was requested for 80 and is recommended for 70. Could you explain that?
Sure. The 80 was my back of the napkin when I was putting this together about what I expected the contracts for monitoring and those things. With what we have, the 70 is more in line.
Thanks. And this depth service is all covered by the money that we have already collected? We're a year ahead, essentially, or two.
We have collected the MSD revenue and we have transferred the money out, but, you know, again, the town general fund is putting in around $200,000 in addition to that.
Right. Thank you.
Community development.
The part-time person that comes into play here is,
That is intern. If that works out, you may see, and depending on the projects, you may see a request for, you know, additional funding to, you know, to take advantage of intern costs for quality work.
And the debt services vehicles? Yeah.
travel was probably down a little again this year just because of, or didn't full, you budgeted 8 again this year. And maybe because of COVID, you didn't have as many trips.
Joe had to stay close.
That's all I had.
Can we move on to parks?
This is where one of your recommendation changes are, right?
Correct. It would be reducing the events budget by $38,861. And if you're looking at the requested and the recommended and the capital outlay over 5,000, originally, when we put this together, we were expecting to do the shoreline protection project out here, and actually do the larger project over by Sea Colony, and in that area we were expecting to do that next year, and those got flip-flopped because of both the fact that we got the grant and the fact that we wanted to incorporate those with the other sidewalk improvements. So it just flip-flopped. That project hasn't been eliminated. This is one of those cases where the CIP was changed to flip-flop those two specific projects.
And can you remind me, I think you went over this, but what are we spending the 53.5 on professional services this year?
The 53.5 was for all the permitting, the permitting and the other work associated with the.
Oh, with the project.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, with the shoreline project.
Yeah.
So will that last, or will it only last a couple years, any of that permitting, or was that just
Well, we don't have the permits yet, but I think they're usually 3-year permits. And we're still going to pursue both permits, but just from a construction standpoint, we would be flip-flopping them.
Got it.
The actual projects.
Chris, this is where we're in the $25,000 at the repair of the amphitheater under repairs and maintenance. I mean, the 19 and 25 would be again for next year?
Yeah, you know, that's, once again, that's a catch-all, but I would expect for next year that it would include amphitheater repairs, but also if we had to do any major sections of the parking areas or things, it's maintenance money there because we know something's going to come up every year.
Do we need to make a motion to recommend the change?
It's not really necessary at this point. What I would suspect is that depending on how this goes, I'll be coming next week. I'll come back to you with a list of the changes that were discussed,
Okay.
and then and then we would go from there.
Okay.
A motion on what, though, Nancy?
Well, the line.
What the recommended
one of
changes
those
I presented earlier.
recommendations are in
Oh,
on this
these.
page.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry,
And I didn't know if
thanks.
we had to sort of formally
Got it.
recommend the
Right
change
now, I just marked it
when
out.
it came up.
Okay.
I think we passed another one, too. A few ones back.
Yeah,
didn't
yeah, we did. It's
Sorry.
within the streets.
Yeah, sorry.
Anything else in that area? Transfer to other funds. Do we want to get into the MSD discussion right now, Chris, or hold on that for a few minutes?
We certainly can, because that's what that money would be. That would be whatever MSDs we collect, we'd be transferring that into the capital reserve, and then it would come from the capital reserve back out when we get to the debt payments. Now would be an appropriate time, I guess, to get into some weeds.
And I'm sorry, on parks, real quick, why does it jump up, double in 2022? That's got to be a CIP thing that I'm just not thinking of in your forecast on page 44?
Yeah, that's the shoreline project.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. When I see those big ones, I was like, what?
Contrary to we aren't trying to hide anything. So we want people to see, we want to try to make it as transparent as process. And so all those comments are good because, it's all part of, I want people to understand where, what the thought process is, and that anything after this year is open for, is open for discussion. And the reason why we do it the way we do, and in that I provide you with projections, and I put this right here, so you will ask, you will see, and you will say, hey, and then you can look and know, what these plans are, and that's all they are at this point, are plans.
Yeah, it's very helpful.
All right, so this is a lot, and we're trying to do our best to show this in a way that makes sense. And I will try my best to explain. So if we start with this sheet, let me go through what you're looking at, and I have to put on my reading glasses to see it. So at the very top, and if you want to highlight the multicolored, the Technicolor code up there, and make it bigger. Yeah. So if that is, that is in your the left-hand corner, and all this are the example of the various items that are in play for the beach nourishment project. The first thing, the gray, is what the original cost was expected to be for maintenance of the beach nourishment project. The original estimate was $4.5 million. The county would have paid, or the county is locked into providing $2,266,000. That means we would have to debt out $2.293 million. The interest on that is estimated to be about $137,000, and so you get a total cost of $2.4 million. That was the original. Over the last, really with Hurricane Dorian, the estimates are that $3.3 million worth of sand from the project has been lost. So that means that the costs of that original project have gone up by $3.3 million. Now we are working with FEMA, and it's a very slow, tedious process, and you all approved a contract last month to engage Coastal Protection Engineering to assist us in working with FEMA, because you don't just say, hey, FEMA, we lost $3.3 million. You have to go through all kinds of surveys and everything for that. But we are trying to get $3.3 million from FEMA. Regardless, the example B is that $3.3 million is the estimated additional cost to the project because of losses experienced during Hurricane Dorian and those events. That puts the new cost estimate at $8.125 million for the project. Once again, so this is going to be important here for some scenarios. So if we were to assume that we weren't going to get any FEMA money or any of the grant money that we've applied for, and we had to pay it on our own, from that $8.125 million, $2.266 comes off the top because the county is paying us that. That would leave us having to debt out $5.859 million. Interest on that would be $351,544. So the total cost, net cost, would be $6,210,000 and change. Okay? So that's an example B. Example C assumes that we're going to get $2.25 million in a grant. And if we got that, that will reduce the cost that we have to debt out to $3.359 million. Interest on that is estimated at $201,000, and so the total debt costs on that would be $3,560,000 and change. Example D is a similar model, but instead of getting the grant, we get full FEMA funding at $3.3 million. That would put our debt at $2.559 million. Estimated debt service at $154,000 for a total debt of $2,713,366. The one that everyone's going to like, but is the most unlikely, and unlikely to the point that I didn't want to put it in here, but I did, is that we get both full funding from FEMA. We get the grant fully funded. The county kicks in the same amount, and it basically pays for the project except for $59,000 in debt. I mean, in extra costs. Again, is that a possibility? Yes. What would I put that at? About 1%, or rather 0.5%. And I certainly don't want to direct council to focus on that, although you all know and I know that it's going to be very popular.
How likely could any of these be partially funded? For example, could we, I know you said the state only had about 11 million and there were a bunch of people going after it. So then, would it be possible that they could throw us like 500,000? And then similarly, could we expect that FEMA might say, you can't have 3.3, but we'll give you 1.5? There's a whole like mixture of any variables in there?
Exactly. And we have no idea, in spite of inquiries, we have no idea what the state is planning to do with all the, how they're going to divvy that money up. And frankly, you know, with FEMA, it's all about that justification and showing it. And so, yeah, absolutely. Do I reasonably expect to get some funding from FEMA? Yes. I'm much more, you know, I'm much more confident in that at some level than I am with the grant, just because the public access issue, I think, is going to be a factor, and with the state. So, you know, but I don't have any, aside from guessing, I have no idea where to put that, which is why it makes it so difficult. My position on that was to say, you know, we need to hedge our bets, and you know, in hedging our bets, I focused on example C, and used that as sort of my model on what I recommended for the MSDs. Which brings us down to, so just scroll down a little bit, Allison. So it brings it, stop right there. So, so everything on the right-hand side, in the boxes, is the backing information for everything that's on the left. And so the first box underneath the red, which talks about my assumptions, is where we're at now, or where we were at prior to this year. So our MSDA, the current rate is 14.8 cents. MSDB is 31.5 cents. You have to calculate a revenue neutral rate for that, and the revenue neutral rate for that is 12.96 cents for MSDA and 28.5 cents for MSDB. The way it sort of played out when all the numbers are thrown together is that with the debt, the general fund is paying 17%. The county has an additional contribution of 15%. MSDA accounts for 44% of debt service, and MSDB is 24% of debt service. Okay. We also calculated what the average levy was, just so you all could see that. And so the original average levy in MSDA was $799. And remember, MSDA includes oceanfront and non-oceanfront. MSDB is exclusively oceanfront, and the original average levy at the time was $3,353. So then if you go down and you look at everything under there, we tried to color code it, and we also ran the scenarios of how the percentages break out, and then we showed on the right of those boxes what the levy would be and what the difference was between the original levy. So my example, and let's jump down to example C.
Oh, and then the bottom one just adds it all up? That dark blue box under, oh, no, never mind, sorry. I'll just,
Example C, you can see that under this, the general fund would pay 6% of total anticipated costs. MSDA would be 47%. MSDB would be 47%. The rate for MSDA would be 0.68 cents, and for MSDB would be 27.2 cents. And so you would have a difference of, it would be $429 and then $3,257, which is a difference of $371 on average. Again, we're talking averages for MSDA and $96 for MSDB. Not what many people wanted, but that was my recommendation. I ran another scenario based on some input. And for this one, I would like you to go over to example C1. I'm sorry to jump all over the place, but I'm trying.
around the corner?
Yeah. So go over to example C1. Okay, so if you look at this, the change here, it doesn't change the recommendation, doesn't change the overall principle, but does change the apportionment. Okay, so under this scenario, MSDA would pay 52%, MSDB would pay 28%, and then the town's general fund would pay pay 20% of the total costs. So, so if you look over on the far right of that box and you see total town GF, that includes interest and an additional supplement of $134,364 provided by the entire town for that project. The result of that would be, if you were to follow this, and again, frankly, the county could put, the town could put, the council could adopt any percentage they wanted. I'm just trying to illustrate an example. So if you took MSDA and said that was going to, that was going to be 52%, that would drop it down to 7 cents, or that would increase from 0.68 to 7 cents. MSDB would drop from 27.2 to 15.3 cents. And so what you would be looking at is a slight, well, it would still be for MSDA under this scenario, the original levy from 2017 would be reduced for MSDA by $358, MSDB by $1,521. And then, of course, the town is paying 20%, which is 2% less than, well, is 5% more than what we're paying currently, but if you look at the way it was originally apportioned, it's 2% less of the town and county contribution. So that's one example. The other, and those are two examples based on my recommendation. C was my recommendation. C1 is another variation of that recommendation.
General fund at the bottom of that box on the right, 20% is 134.
That's an additional, that's for the principal.
That's, okay, thank you. So the contribution in this C1 scenario for the town is about 200.
Yeah.
And it goes down each
Yeah, it goes down.
Okay.
The town would be putting in 873,000 under this model. And again, these are models. These are projections and could change significantly, but we have to start somewhere.
Right.
$873,366 would be the entire town's contribution, the town general fund contribution.
Over the 5-year period.
Over the 5-year period.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
So I was also asked to run numbers, to run some scenarios based on the assumption that the town wasn't going to get any grant funding at all. So if we had to, if instead of example C, where we get $2.5 million from somewhere, we have to pay the whole thing ourselves, how would that be, what would that look like? So the first box, and it's example B1, and yes, I recognize that I went from B to, in one thing I went from C to C1, this time I went from B1, I started with B1, but someone's going to point that out, so I'm just going to admit to that now. So under a scenario where we're not getting any other funds, under B1, and go ahead and go over to the box in this case, the principal on that would be $1,171,820 per year. Divided in half, that would be with no additional town contribution except for the interest. That would be $585,910 for MSDA, $585,910 for MSDB. That equates to 11.8 cents for MSDA and 47.5 cents for MSDB. There's a reason why I'm not recommending this, and the reason is even though there's a $56 reduction in MSDA, if we were to divide that by 50, if we were to take the assumption and divide that by 50%, it would be a substantial increase for MSDB, which it would be $2,334. That's with the town paying the interest on that. So I decided to run several other scenarios based on that to show, to sort of figure out give you an idea of if you were to take the tack that the town needed to, be prepared and take action this budget year, with the assumption that we're not going to get any help, what could some other scenarios look like? So if you look at example B1, this is an assumption that the town, MSDA pays 55%, MSDB pays 30%, and the general fund pays an additional 15%. So the town pays an additional 15%. The principle in all these scenarios, well, in the next two scenarios are the same, but how that principle is, the paying of that principle is apportioned out changes. So if the town were to pay 15% of the costs, we would be looking at a total town contribution over the 5-year period of $235,429.
That's example B1?
Yes, B2, I'm sorry. B2.
But I thought B2 was 20% on the general fund.
Hold on a second. I didn't update the percentages to match this one, so that's the difference. The number, so disregard that. Focus on the 55, the 30, and the 15.
Okay.
Under example B2.
Okay. Got it. That just needs to be 15 over here. Got it. I'll just scratch that. Thanks.
Wait, hold on to that for a second. So something got screwed up there. The numbers, the percentages, So focus on that one. I have to update that. That's an error we didn't catch, but it's 12. It would MSDA would change to 12.96 cents. MSDB under that scenario would be 28.5 cents. And I'll have to rerun those numbers to just double check. I don't want to. I'm not sure why that wasn't caught, but once again, that's an error that I made.
A lot of numbers.
And I'm full of them. So. Yeah, I'm not. I'm just double checking some of these real quick.
Yeah, it looks like these have the,
So,
in these boxes, but it doesn't show the same.
so example B3 is another variation where you have where no town general fund, but contribution, but a 40% change, and you would, under that scenario, you would see the MSDA rate be at 14.16 cents and MSDB at 38 cents. So that gives you an idea of where those rates would be. Example B4 is kind of the wild card in this, and this takes an example where we say, okay, we're going to, oh, I know what the difference, never mind. Where it says instead of taking that 1.17820 in the total debt and apportioning it and amortizing it out over 5 years, let's look at it over a 7-year period, because we know we have 2 years where we're going to be collecting. And then when we get to the end of that, we know we collect for 5 years, and we know at that 5th year we have to make a decision about maintenance, similar to what we're doing now. And so this says, well, what if we say that everything we collect, instead of stopping at 5 years, we assume that we're going to continue for an additional 2 years for the debt payment. So we continue collecting, and that would reduce the rate. If we just divided that between MSD and MSDB with only the town paying the interest, we would be looking at 10.1 cents. For MSDA and 27.1 cents for MSDB. And so those are some of the worst case scenarios. And I'm going to pause there. I'll double check these. I think I know what the difference is, but I want to double check, and I can't do that on the fly. Mm-hmm. So those are some scenarios. In addition, what I did was, and if you can flip to the next page that I gave you, what I did was I ran a variety of scenarios based on if the council decided to change the MSD rates, or if they decided to add an additional percentage on the revenue neutral rate, what impact would that have on the bottom line of the budget moving forward after FY22? Because remember, anything you do this year from a tax levy standpoint doesn't hit our shared revenue percentage until the following year. So we're not going to see an increase in shared revenues if we do anything this year, because that was established last year. It will have an impact on FY 2022 and moving forward. So and we ran we ran scenarios based on with the total levies being on the scenarios on the MSD page. The differences are, for example, B1 and B3 are essentially the same because the total levy is the total additional levy is the same. The differences are when the town is paying a certain additional portion, then the levies change it, the total amount of the MSDs changes, and that has an impact. So, for example, the budget as presented, in FY 2021, at least for now, we took out the $9,953 that I was having in the net change, which impacted our fund balance. In FY 2022, I'm expecting, based on the budget I presented, that we'll have $153,851 at the end of FY 22. And again, the assumptions that we're looking at are that all CIP items are funded as presented, which is a big if all the time, and that no personnel are added, but it does include personnel, salary cost increases and all those things. So, as you know, FY 2023 could be a very big year because, we have items that are coming online, CIP items that are coming online, that decisions will have to be made really in beginning in FY 2022 of how they fit in with the bigger picture. Same thing with FY 2024 and FY 2025. FY 2026, it's a little bit better, but we know that something's going to have to give. I recognize that. You all recognize that. What's probably going to have to give is, is that larger scale CIP items are going to have to be scaled back or adjusted, pushed out. Those are largely the areas where we're going to have to likely focus, and that's assuming that that's assuming that we don't have any issues in that related to COVID or anything like that in coming years. Scenario B1 and B3, it would improve things significantly. But of course, there's a cost to that, and that cost is additional assumptions based on MSDs. But you see that in scenario B1 and B3, you're looking at next year about $365,000. Then we drop from 412 in the hole to 225, from 559 to 342, from 427 to 280, and then by FY 2026, we're back in the black. Scenario B2, which would be if the town decides to pay a large portion of the fund, we have to come up with another $176,000, or just back end that to FY 2026. But because even with that, it still is a little bit higher contribution and increases our levy. We're still getting $68,000. We're looking at $520,000 in the hole, $639 in the hole, $575 in the hole, and then $74 in the hole after that. And that would be if the town, if we had to pay the whole thing and the town had to committed to paying a large portion of the principal. Scenario B4. Again, no change in FY 2021, but $146,000 in 2022, 440, 528, 468, and 154. Not great. Scenario C1, if the town paid a portion of the of the principal, we would drop to 134,000. 156, 739, 815, 755, and 314. Those are the bottom lines with some of the various MSD scenarios. What we also did is we ran some numbers of if the revenue neutral rate was to increase by a portion, and I just selected and that's at the very top of your page right there. And so a quarter of a cent, half a cent, 3/4 of a cent, and 1 cent. And you can see, that our revenues would increase. 1 cent brings in roughly $186,000. So, you can apportion that out and see what additional revenue would bring in. I only ran a number based on if we went up 1 cent, because I figure you can surmise from there. So if we went up 1 cent and didn't do anything else with MSDs, and they were just as presented, so no changes to MSDs,
That's up here at the top. So it's
Yeah.
1 cent plus the budget as presented.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. You're looking at, of course, right now, we actually would have a contribution to the fund balance, but I was focusing on the differences in shared revenues in this with those tax increases. So you're looking at 168,000, then still 418, 490, 434, and 122 is the estimate on that. So these are just scenarios and food for thought.
Quick question on that last one. When I look at the purple one, the one where you did the 1 cent increase, which by your calculations would give us an extra 186, and I look at the net change.
You're very astute, because what that didn't capture, that is just factoring in differences in shared revenues. It didn't capture the additional 186.
Okay.
So we would need to run that to add the 186 back into
So it
that.
actually doesn't include the 186, it just includes the result of
the
what
result of-
happens
yes.
if you have an extra 186.
Exactly.
So we need to add that in.
Yeah, so we need to add that in.
So Chris, the most likely scenario is this is going to cost us over $8 million. We got 2 hurricane seasons to go through, so we have no idea what's going to happen this year and next year prior to putting sand on the beach. And we have no idea whether we're going to get a state grant, which is probably a very low percentage. And we probably will get some FEMA, but who knows whether we'll get 3.3 million. So we really need to be looking at collecting the 6.2 million over the next 5 years. And if we do that, which one of these scenarios is closest to maintaining the same rates at revenue neutral? Which one is the closest? B1?
Well, you got the numbers right here on the side, right?
Yeah.
If these are right, you can see the ones that are closest.
Yeah.
Yeah, the revenue neutral rate is 12.96 and 28.5, and
Wouldn't you say B4 if you're trying to look at the same amount of tax people are paying? Is that what you're asking? What was your question?
Well, we're going to have to recover, we should recover 6.2 million to be on the safe side over the next 5 years.
Right, so you're looking at B.
Well, it probably is. And then you say, we got the revenue neutral rate. We don't change anything except basically use the revenue neutral rate like we're doing on the tax rate for general taxes.
the closest from the revenue neutral rate, if B2 is what what, if we went with the revenue neutral rate, is what MSDA and MSDB would be. And the other piece of that is that of the principal costs, the general fund would be paying an additional 15%. Now, one of the things that one of the ways you can run that, you can run this scenario is that the town in the next 2 years does not have to pay, under this scenario, would not have to pay the 176 because you're just collecting the MSDs. The actual estimate start date for the special obligation bonds would be in FY '23, and so the town could hold off on putting in the 176 until 2023 when you're actually paying the, you know, I didn't factor it that way, but that's one way you could calculate it. Because you just you're collecting MSDs, they're for that purpose, but we don't have to pay the 176 until actually plus the interest until the loan actually starts.
See, one of my concerns is going in with artificially low rates, and then all of a sudden in year 2 or 3 we got to bump them way up because now we're way short of the 6.2 million plus.
I guess conversely, we could go in with a conservative rate like you're discussing, but then if we do get the money, we can always reduce the MSD. Just so, I mean, we can change the MSD rate every year.
Correct. I mean, one of the things that I was trying to do is provide certainty, provide some level of certainty for people to the extent we could, so that they don't have to worry about, okay, this year I've saved up $4,000 to pay to pay my MSD, and I'm going to save up that much next year, but all of a sudden it's $8,000, and I was trying to do this to provide a level of certainty, but absolutely, I mean, the MSD rates and frankly, there is likely to be some kind of change because as the numbers come back into focus, we're dealing totally with estimates right now.
Well, look at our share over the last 5 years has been 6.9 million. Now we're up to 6.2 million on the renourishment. So I mean, that's not much different than over what we've had over the last 5 years. And I think once again, to artificially go low is going to increase taxes in future years because we're not done yet with the hurricane seasons coming forth.
Well, the other thing that I think it's difficult for everyone to comprehend is the fact that we're kind of 2 years ahead too. So we got busy collecting the MSDs and we were really good about it and got our formulas, and then the project was delayed, so we collected 2 solid years before we started spending it. So now effectively we're 2 years ahead, which you could look at as a good thing or a bad thing, and the only reason I bring it up
we're
is
2 years ahead of collections, not 2 years ahead of payments.
right. Well, and let's talk about that. So maybe I'm wrong on my thought, because what I was thinking was people might think, spread it out over 7, like you have in one of your scenarios, because we're not going to start spending it until 2 years, so we'll collect for 7, but that's not really good fiscal management, because we'll probably be spending it again after 5. In other words, this is not going away, which is something that we tried to explain when we got into this.
Right.
And it's also a good point to point out that it's not easy to do this one thing. And so other areas of the town, it's not a given that everybody's like, well, when am I going to get beach nourishment? Because anyway, but the maintenance doesn't go away. So I guess I would be an advocate for not spreading it out over 7 for that reason. So I just want to make that point.
Yeah.
We should do it over 5 unless things get really bad.
Well, and just to clarify, so, we started collecting with the anticipation that the following, there was a chance originally that within the fiscal year where we put the MSDs in place, that we would actually be starting a project. The project got bid out. It got delayed because the bids were way too high, because what we learned from that was the dredge companies, they want a year out.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's one of the things we're dealing with now. I mean, I anticipate on the 17th, next week, bringing you a contract for the actual permitting piece of this. And because we have to start that now so that we can bid it out a year before the project starts. So we ended up having 2 years of MSD collections. During that second year was when we issued the bonds. So we're not really paying. There's some costs, but we're not paying the full bond amount in that first year. So then the next year is when the full amount that we were paying. So we have 2 years left of special obligation bond payments, this current fiscal year and next fiscal year. And then we anticipate starting all over again with another bond issuance, and the payments starting shortly after that. So.
And to that point, we have the money already collected.
Correct.
Okay.
And it sits in a capital reserve fund, and it can only be used for the beach nourishment related expenses.
Right. And so I mean, we've got it, but it's going out, but we've already got it. So it is smart to just start, I think, collecting. But given that 5 or 7 years, I don't know.
Well, I think if we're on 5-year cycles, we should stay on it 5-year cycles. I kind of agree with that, because you're mortgaging the future.
Right.
And I would rather be conservative this year and say, okay, we're going to keep the revenue neutral rates in place, and your tax bill will probably be very similar to what you had in prior years. And I'd rather come back next year and say, oh, we did get a $3.3 million FEMA grant. We're going to be able to lower taxes over the next 4 years. But that 3.3 and that 2.5, there is no guarantee we're going to get that. And I got to look at, this right now it's costing us $6.2 million. I think that's going to escalate, because we're going to have more damage between now and the time we put sand on the beach in 2 years out. I don't know how everybody else feels about that, but I'd rather be very conservative right now. And people are paying this tax. And if we do the revenue neutral rate, as long as we keep the percentages fairly equal, it should be pretty much the same year in and year out as to what they're paying now.
I can't say I totally disagree with this conservative approach, but I know that we did talk about this being a 5-year expense and then going into a maintenance phase. And so it is real, but the numbers are the numbers, and we did just have $3.3 million worth of extra damage that we weren't expecting. So I just throw that out there that, the public were expecting some kind of relief that we're in the MSD zones.
Well, I'd hate to be, say pay half of what I have this year, and then the following year, oh, by the way, now you got to go up, 1.5 times, because now we've undercollected. And so instead of getting a $5,000 bill and then a $2,500 bill, all of a sudden you're going to get a $7,500 bill a year after that. I think that's a much worse case for the individual taxpayer, and that's why I say I think we should take the most reasonable approach, which is we got to raise $6.2 million, and we got to raise 1/5 of it next year, and we're also going to protect our shared revenues. That's another thing, and then basically the scenario changes next year, then we can perhaps change the tax rate.
Chris, can I ask a question about the change to the general fund, like going back and forth between 6% and 20%? It's currently 17%, right?
Yes.
So is that an attempt to sort of bring, like, as you said, relief of pitching in more?
I don't want to complicate things too much because we lose people, but if you recall, the original scenario was to sort of apportion it out so that MSDA, which was originally all non-oceanfront property owners, was 40% of the cost. MSDB, which was only oceanfront, was 40% of the costs, and this is principal,
Right.
and this is with the county money off the top, and that's a whole nother discussion, but that was based on, the number that was developed was based on 7.82 cent tax increase townwide, which is, and that's what Nags had essentially paid for originally, and that was, the county said that they would provide funding for our first project based on that. So you take the estimated cost, the county we're responsible for 7.82, the equivalent of 7.82 cents, and then the county would make up the difference. And that's how we ended up with the county paying for an additional portion. But our plan to pay what was left, which was $1,221,390. That was the plan that was developed, was 40% MSD, 40% MSDB, and 20% town. Originally, I recommended 10% town, but it was increased to 20% town. Attorneys got involved and recommended adding oceanfront to MSDA. So that took the 40-40 and altered it to, to essentially 44-24, and so that's where that came from, and. So again, in going through all this, I had to start somewhere, and so I started with, the council can alter how much you feel like is appropriate for the entire town to pay, but this is not the entire town in this area. This is a specific 1.7 mile area, and clearly the largest beneficiaries are oceanfront property owners, and then the second beneficiaries are non-oceanfront property owners whose access is tied to that area. And then the town does have there's a reputation cost for the entire town. And, what that amount of reputation cost is worth is subjective to what you all feel that is worth. And so the two things that we need to decide if the council is going to put in MSD rates is the amount that you think is the correct amount to focus on, whether it's the total anticipated principal or some other number, and so that's one item. And then the second item is, what do you think a fair apportionment of that is? Is it, is it 50-50 like I presented? Is it 60-40 because, you have roughly 109 oceanfront owners in that area, and you have 788 non-oceanfront? I mean, and should the town put in several more? I mean, those are the questions, that unfortunately we have precious little time to sort out.
Do you have the value of the houses in A versus B? So you can take that times the revenue neutral rate and see what the delta is?
Wasn't it on the average?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, but it's,
What are you asking? I'm sorry, I missed your, I don't understand.
well, okay, you've got a value of the 788 properties and a value of the 109, and you apply the revenue neutral rates to those. Okay, if we're trying to get to 6.2 million, then what's that delta, which would become the town responsibility? Not counting, not counting future interest.
That is what we tried to achieve on B2. So, you know, if you put in the revenue neutral rate of 12.96
All right.
and 28.5, that's how you end up with MSDA at 643,581, MSDB at 351, and then the town's portion of that would be, to make up that principal, would be an additional 176.
B2 on the right-hand side,
Yeah, I'm looking.
Yes,
because
yes.
B2 over on the left side doesn't, it doesn't sync up, right?
And I think I have to go back and do it, but the difference, I think, is that 55, 30, and 15 is the principal, whereas the 20, 52, and 28 includes the interest as well. I got to double check that. I'm pretty sure that's what that is, but I've been preoccupied the last couple days and haven't been able to focus.
So that B2, I mean, so it's the number, Chris, in the B2, do you think that the levy, that those levy numbers correspond? The, you know, it would go from 799 to 744 and 3,300 up to 5,500. Do you think that?
I have to double check those,
Okay.
but I believe so. Again, I need to double. I need to double check those.
But sum total of those three should equal 6.2 million without interest.
Yeah, again, that 55, 35, and 15 does not include the interest. That's just getting to the principal. We're dividing the, you know, we're going with the assumption that the town is going to pay the interest on this, which is an assumption you could change too. But, you know, and so if you just do a straight, you know, if you just do a straight principal and look at how the percentages play out, that's 55, 30, and 15. And I can double check those, but that was the calculation. And in the 12.96, when you apply that, when you apply that to the values in MSDA, and when you apply the 28.5 cents to the values in MSDB, then those are the numbers you get.
The ratio of the values.
Yes.
And I know, Don, you guys are on the same page, but I need you to just say that one more time. You're taking the value, you're looking at the difference between, you want to compare the values, take that percentage, but then if you're doing that, why is the 15% coming into play on the town side? If you're just looking at the value of the difference between A and B.
That's not the calculation.
Okay.
The calculation is, bear with me a second.
You're trying to just go in straight value.
Ink?
Don't draw on the screen.
This is a PowerPoint, so I can't put a pointer. If you look at that, which is the revenue neutral rate for MSDA,
Right.
Right,
and you take the values, and I don't have the values up there, that's,
yeah.
you know, there are 20,000 different sheets going on here. But you take the value of MSDA and you multiply it this is the number you get.
Okay, thank you. Now, I got the light bulb. And then, so the difference is what you need to make the 6.2?
Exactly.
Okay,
The
thank
difference
you.
is, not the 6.2, the difference is what we need to make that, because we're assuming that the town's going to pay that as well.
Okay,
You know, that's principal, that's to make up the principal.
Right,
So the
the five,
total,
right,
you know,
the five.
the annual total town commitment, once we start paying the actual debt, would be that line, the total town general fund. So the bill comes due at some point, is what it comes down to.
right, the difference, okay, I needed to get that in my head, I'm sorry.
And I apologize, I know that these are all complicated and there's a lot going on. I'm trying to provide you the information that you need.
Well, what I guess I'm trying two things. I'm trying to realize what the cost is going to be realistically, and it could even be higher than what it is now. Number one, and number two is trying to avoid the fact that we're going to put a tax rate out there that next year we got to come back and say, oh, by the way, it's going to go up. What I'm trying to do is get as close to where it might be over 5 years versus, in fact, all of a sudden arbitrarily coming in at something low, and all of a sudden it's going to be a lot higher. So that's what I'm trying to achieve. And the good news could be is grants or FEMA money. And obviously that would go the other way, and that'd be very good news for us. But neither of those are known, and neither one's probably going to be known by 7/1.
Oh, yeah, we won't know that.
No. So,
I mean, and frankly, with FEMA, we're talking 2 years. I mean, it's a process, and it's a long, drawn out process.
and then hidden behind this, we're trying to protect our shared revenues too.
And
Yeah,
that,
We're going to the
that's
revenue
what's-
neutral, we're going to
yeah.
protect our revenues. the
and
year
that's
next.
and that's significant. And it's with what I'm doing now is there are so many different scenarios, and it's before you adopt a budget, whether it be next week, 2 weeks from now, or mid 11:59 on 6:30, my hope would be that I can run those projections for you without the noise of everything else, so that you can
Yeah.
really focus on that.
Well, I'd like to, I guess what I'd like to see is to zero in on the 6.2 and with no relief and revenue neutral, and then see what the difference is. And, I'm going to get a tax bill with a new rate on it from Town of Duck, and it's either going to be up or down, I don't know, but at least it's, the same kind of, in theory, the same rate as I've had in the past, with the exception of my appraised values. So it's hard to argue one way or the other on that if you get basically getting a revenue neutral rate. I would just like to avoid major surprises in future years.
It's safe to say that when we were talking about the MSD rates going down for after 5 years, we were working with this 4.5 number, or we had a number. Now that number has increased by about 1.8%.
No, a lot more than that, right?
I mean,
3.3 million.
well, what I mean is over the, maybe I'm not saying that right. It's almost twice is what I want to say. It's 1 point, I'm not saying that right. But anyway, it's almost doubled,
Yes.
Yeah.
is what I'm trying to say. So that in itself is a factor that we need to make sure everybody understands, regardless of the grants, as you say. But the fact that we thought that we could really reduce the MSD rates was based on the fact that we thought the maintenance project was going to be a lot lower.
Right.
So that's just a point that is important. but I don't know how I've got to let it all percolate in terms of, I feel like the town needs to, contribute, and in this case, on B2, you have the town involved, and because of the fact that we did that originally, when you said we were talking about 10% on your way back when, and we said, no, the town is benefiting from this. We've got this blight, pools falling in the ocean, and, terrible safety issues and condemned properties conceivably. That values the whole town. So I'm in favor of not having it all be shouldered by the MSDs as well.
I agree with you, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's, and, so there's all that, and all we need is money. So anyway, but those are my feelings. I don't disagree with you. I think it's better to plan for the conservative approach, and we are dealing with more money than we thought, but I got to just put all that in my head for a while.
And if we get that FEMA grant, that takes away that increase, that allows us to reduce these rates down over the next couple of years. And so if, basically you're staying pat now, unknown future, but in fact, there is an opportunity out there for reduced cost. But then again, as I say, we still got 2 summers to go through here too, so.
Yeah.
This is a little unrelated, but sort of related. When we've done the revenue neutral rates in the past, you have sometimes taken it beyond the average and kind of showed, what a sound front, what an ocean front, and what a medium middle of the road, middle. Have we done any of that this time with the, because this will come into factor with the actual averages that people will, like when we say it's revenue neutral, but let's say the value of an oceanfront has gone up exorbitantly, that's really not going to be a.
I feel like you did talk about that when you did the budget presentation, because remember he said that there's going to be some people that, most people might go down a little bit, but then if your property,
Yeah, we
up.
talked
I mean,
about the revenue,
but I know what
the
you're
revenue
talking
neutral
about.
factor.
Right.
yeah.
I just wanted to
is
know.
that some people will pay less, some people will pay more, some people will.
And we've done that before. When we've zeroed in on some ideas of numbers, then we've said, all right, well, let's apply this to an actual couple, 3, 4 oceanfront homes. Look what's happening. And here's
Yeah.
the actual numbers, and then the middle, and then the sound.
The only difference this time is that we don't have final. I don't yet have I have the aggregate numbers,
Right.
but I don't have the individual numbers.
Got it.
And so I can't zero in on a number. I mean, I can apply what the overall, I could say, your house, and I forget what Soundfront was, but, went up 12%. And I could apply that, but that doesn't, that's just, that's just an example. What we can do, and what we did as part of the budget presentation, and can look at it again, is we did what we called the revenue neutral zero factor. And we had, because we have those numbers, and so we know if the revenue neutral rate is the overall rate, and we went through and we said, if your average value under the new rate was above this, then you're going to see a tax increase, even with revenue neutral.
Right. That's what Nancy, I remember that too. The ones that are going to get hurt in the whole MSD equation are the sound fronts, because their values are higher and they're not in the oceanfront zone, and then probably the people in the taper, where they're sort of like, why me? But anyway. So.
Yeah, and you're going to hear most from the taper.
How does everybody else feel on council about, going forward with revenue neutral rates and trying to recover the 6.2 million?
Yeah, I have some questions, because I wasn't here when you guys did all this MSD business before. So can you explain to me what that does? Creating the municipal service district, the MSD, right? Is that what that stands for?
Yes, municipal service district.
Does that sort of protect the revenue neutral rate by not increasing the taxes and shouldering those increased costs for particular people. Does that protect that at all, or is that the design of that?
The idea behind municipal service districts is that if you're in a municipal service district, then you are getting, I'll simplify it, you're getting a higher, you're being taxed additional because you're getting a benefit that the rest of the town does not enjoy. So, so in this case, the whole town isn't getting a beach nourishment project. The project area as defined, that's the area where, you know, that's the area that is getting additional additional service.
So that being said, though, does it still protect that revenue neutral rate so that you don't have to increase the taxes?
I'm having a hard time getting the question.
So if we created this MSDs, these two MSDs, right, because we're going to increase service for the people that are included in those two areas,
For
right?
the beach nourishment project, yeah.
That causes us not to have to raise the revenue neutral rate with the entire town.
It means that we don't have to charge an additional tax for the entire town.
Okay.
If that's what you're getting at, it doesn't really have to do with the revenue neutral rate per se. It's just an addition. I mean, because you know,
we don't want to raise the revenue neutral rate because that will affect the revenue sharing. Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
So separate the So separate the revenue neutral rate for a second, and let's focus on that. So the revenue neutral rate, and take out the MSDs. The revenue neutral rate is, you know, is the calculation you have to do, and you have to establish that rate, and it's based on. It's based on your general ad valorem tax, so not MSDs. And that's the 19.64 cents, is that if you look at everything minus the MSDs, but it includes the entire town, including the MSD area, there's a general tax rate that's put in place, and ours currently is 22.5. And, you know, in the revenue neutral rate of that, which is the amount of the rate, or the rate under the new assessment that would bring in the same levy with a growth factor that's the average of the number of years since the last property reassessment. So you have that, and then you have your MSDs, which is the cost of that additional service.
Well, let me just ask a question. So the description that you just did regarding the revenue neutral rate.
Rob, get up to the mic. Get up to the mic.
The question is, how does explain the revenue sharing and how the revenue neutral.
Okay. The shared revenues are apportioned, and there are slight variations to this, but the easiest way to explain it is the shared revenues are apportioned based on a town's total tax levy, which includes MSDs.
Okay.
So if we collected no MSDs, our shared revenues would drop significantly simply because of.
Okay. And our creation of these two MSDs, as we said, it was because presumably the people in those areas are going to have increased service, for lack of a better word.
Yes.
I mean, I would be arguing that the entire town has increased service as a result of the beach renourishment. And why would we not spread that burden over the entire town rather than just that 1.7 miles.
And the council could certainly take that approach.
But, I mean, I understand earlier at the very beginning of this, you said that in order to do that was another whole big process that would take us past June 30th.
That's if you were to change the MSDs themselves. If the council wanted to, for example, if the council wanted to look at this and say, and if I'm going down the wrong path, let me know.
Sure.
But if the council were to say, okay, we think the value of this, which I would call the town reputation cost, if the value of this were high enough that the entire town should pay, and I'll just pull out a number, 5 cent, 5 cent tax.
Whatever.
You should increase it by 5 cents. The town, I mean, there's nothing preventing the council from doing that.
Right.
And then, and they could do that without messing with the MSDs. What you can't do with the MSDs is say, for example, that Skimmer Way can come out without changing the MSDs.
So, no, I mean, we could do it, but we couldn't do it by June 30th.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you wanted to, I mean, it becomes a moot point if you don't charge any tax in it.
So
But if,
I'm not even talking, so having explained what you've done so far, I'm not really talking about changing the MSDs, but I think that the town value might be greater than what we're talking about. I mean, wasn't that this year and last year wasn't this place rated as one of the best beaches on the east coast of the United States? So people come here for that reason. Therefore, the entire town benefits from it.
yeah, and that's a political argument, not a financial.
Well, when the MSDs
boy.
are set up, we did 40-40-20, recognizing that the town would get a benefit. So
Yeah,
it was a
when-
20% contribution by the town.
Plus the,
All the
all the
engineering and
Yes,
all
right,
the
exactly.
background that went on for years
Right.
and years and years,
we
yeah.
fronted all the engineering and the exploratory and all that stuff before we got down the MSD road. But no, I think it's actually right. And I think the other piece of that is the other side of the coin, where this is we're a 6 mile town. So this is a little less than a third of the town, or maybe even, I'm not going to get my calculator out again. I get in trouble. But it's 1.7 miles out of 6, essentially. So that is the area of sand on the beach, right? So when we started doing this, other areas or other people would say anecdotally, oh yeah, our beach is next, in front of Schooner Ridge, or I'm calling out, wherever, let's do more of this. And I thought to myself, this is really pricey and we can't promise, and I think I said that a little earlier, that we can't promise to do this in every other area. So it's not a given, and that the maintenance, and so we're kind of learning as we go, right? So it's expensive, and other areas might say or counter your argument about, like no MSDs, is that, well, hey, I'm paying, my taxes are paying for somebody else to have sand, and where's mine? That's all I'm saying. I mean, there was a lot of that even when we were doing the project.
One other thing that I would just note is that, for example, in Kitty Hawk and in Kill Devil Hills and in Nag's Head, they essentially, they did the whole town, and so their model was different than our model in the sense that they had a general tax rate, and then they also in most cases had an MSD. So there was a general tax that was paying for a portion of the beach nourishment project, and then they also did an additional tax for oceanfront and maybe some back. I don't know exactly how each of them did that, but the driving factor with those was the fact that they were doing the entire town. One of the things, and I'll throw it out here because why not? One of the factors here is the other issue that not only not only is it 1.7 miles, but it's also an area where there's no general access for the entire town, and so, one of the benefits is that, if you're in those neighborhoods, you're tied to that access. You're essentially that's where you're going to go to the beach, that's another factor that's unique to Duck, I think.
I'll just clarify something, too, that you said about the other towns. Kitty Hawk did the entire project, but they didn't have a lot of oceanfront value on their, their ocean fronts were not going to substantiate, so they had to kind of tax the whole town. I think KDH only did half, and I know that Nags Head did not do the whole town, but they did have an MSD, and I can't remember how Kill Devil Hills actually did that half of town project, but they were able to, if it was a 6-mile town, they were doing about 3. Kitty Hawk did all 6, for example. So it was everyone's got a little different personality, everyone's got a little different values on their ocean front. But I know that Nags Head, when they did their renourishment, which was quite a bit more money than they expected to have to pay, as I recall, we're working South Nags Head up, to the pier area. They didn't do the whole town, I don't think, but you could correct me if I'm wrong, and I can't believe I can't remember because it just happened last summer.
The other thing just is, if there's a desire for me to run a scenario, I can run a scenario to show what an entire,
I'm just asking this because I think Monica is concerned, and I agree with her that when this first started, right, you promised people that they were going to, or you said, whether it was a promise or not, you talked about decreasing their MSD assessment because it would be maintenance. Now there's been this damage as a result of Dorian that's going to put another $3.3 million hit on it. And is there in some way for us to mitigate that so that at least we're trying to do what was said was going to happen?
Yeah, it's almost twice as expensive as even the estimate. Now, I have to go back and see what we kind of were projecting for maintenance. I don't know if this 4.559 is more of the, was that the number from way back when?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I don't have to go back then.
Yeah, no, I didn't make that number up.
I can't remember if it was just like right before Dorian or whatever, but yeah, okay, so we were expecting it to be, half of what now the new project cost is. So in that regard,
it's always, it always comes down to, in the project area, how much sand is lost, and there are going to be years. There are going to be years when virtually no sand is lost, and there's going to be years when there's a lot of sand that's lost, you may go, we may go through a period after this nourishment after this maintenance project where, things aren't very crazy, and we end up with with very low maintenance costs. It's unlikely, but there's always that chance. And the question really comes down to, we know there's going to be a cost. I don't think that I don't think that abandoning the project is something that is in anyone's best interest. And so, it simply comes down to what is your preference on, on preparing for the maintenance, and how you get, we know what those numbers are. How we get to them is where we're at.
In the years past too, it took us a long time to get to beach nourishment, probably 4 to 5 years. And there was a lot of discussion, a lot of public input on the MSDs, a lot of discussion, and a lot of discussion on, costs, et cetera. It was a long process with the public.
a lot of learning.
Yeah.
One of the other...
Your original proposal was to, adopt the revenue neutral ad valorem and to decrease the MSDs. And I'm beginning to think that keeping the revenue neutral MSDs, which is not really even keeping up with the fact that the cost is doubled, and continuing to do the overall town 20% is a reasonable scenario to start analyzing as we move forward with the budget, because I'm concerned about the impact of the shared revenues and, you know, the implications to other future budget and CIP projects if we get too terribly tunneled about this one particular project, because we are going to be contributing overall way more than what we had anticipated.
One other factor that you know, I think that you all need to be cognizant of at some level is right now, you know, right now we know, well, we're reasonably, right now, because we do monitoring every year of the entire town, we know that except for in this area, that the rest of the town is relatively stable. You know, we know south of the pier, yeah, there's some small hot spots, but we've seen, you know, we see a normal cycle in those areas of accretion and erosion, and it seems to be very stable, which is why the project wasn't expanded to begin with. Right now, we can assume that that's based on the information we have, that that's going to continue. But as Monica, as you said, at some point, there may be clamoring to do another project, and you know, and I don't want to overthink it. But you know, I think you all need to be aware that, you know, so we establish these models, these ideas on how we're going to fund things. And so, say south of the pier, we have to do a project, and we've already put a model in place. The first factor is that there's county funding, which the county giveth and the county taketh away with this, and we can't be guaranteed. I mean, I would like to think that the county's always going to provide funding for these projects, but if the county's only giving what they're giving now, the $2.266 million, which they aren't guaranteeing for the next nourishment project, and say we have another project that we have to do, and that's going to be $15 million. And, you know, and the entire town has paid in these other areas with these models, and we have to do a nourishment project, we have to do a maintenance project in the current area. You know, I think we have to figure out what models we're going to be comfortable with, because those models are going to set the precedent. We can say that no precedent is going to be set, but we know that if there's a big project, you all are going to get, you know, beat up significantly if you say, yeah, I know that we contributed a lot to all these other projects, but you're going to have to do this all on your own with, you know, with your own MSDs. And so, you know, to what extent you want to factor that in is up to you. But I think at some level, you know, that has to be something that you consider.
The other thing that's really interesting about the project that we did compared to the other towns was the volume of sand that we put out there. That was a $12 million, $11-something million project, which the town... 15. Okay, I can't remember the numbers, but we only paid 7 of it, you know, as a town.
6.993.
Fine. So we paid half of it. So we got $7 million-ish from the county back in that original project. $15 million of sand, which was really, I think that dune scientist didn't even believe Sandy when she said we did it, because he's like, who does, you know, what? So in other words, $15 million of sand went on 1.7 miles of beach in Duck, because we had to do such high dunes and all the crazy escarpment and just the volatility and that was what we were, you know, that's a lot of money in a small area. I'm just making the point. And I don't know that anybody has ever done that before or ever will do that again, based on the topography and the escarpment and all that stuff, and just how crazy that little low area is, and that, you know, ancient riverbed or whatever caused it, however, whatever. But that was a huge amount of money that literally got dumped, sand and money that got dumped in a very concentrated area.
These projects, and our project specifically, you know, we don't. I'm not trying to get into Beach Nourishment 101 here, but just to clarify some of your comments. I mean, what the town did there was, we didn't just have a berm project. We had a beach nourishment project with a storm damage reduction element, and you know, and that storm damage reduction element is one of the things that usually is cost prohibitive, because that's the dune. And that dune is designed, you know, that's the last, you know, that's the last property protection. And that dune is designed for an Isabel level storm, and, you know, and I mean, when things go great and pools aren't falling into areas, and everyone thinks that they're not vulnerable, you know, then those can seem like luxuries. But when it's not happening, you know, those are things that people want to hear, and you know, and it's going to be very interesting, and it'll be very interesting when we get the numbers, and we can actually, you know, when we actually get the tax scroll, and we can compare year to year and say, okay, from, you know, in the project area, what kind of value increase did we see, specifically project, you know, property to property, and taking it the next step is saying, and can we attribute that to the fact that that property was considered more valuable because it was protected. And so people were, even though they had to pay taxes, you know, they knew that there was a project there. There was a commitment to maintain that, and so the investment was greater, and did that increase values? That's a question that we will reasonably be able to answer once we get the tax scrolls. We can't answer it now because we don't know whether the increase in oceanfront property is attributable to that or just across the border and it had no impact.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting.
Yeah.
So, Chris, you got enough direction to move forward on that one?
I don't know if I have enough.
Sure. I mean, it would be helpful to know what I need to prepare for the next budget work session.
Well, you know, I'll restate my concern, and I think we need to recoup the $6.2 million, not assuming that we get any relief from FEMA or the state grant, and that in fact we use a revenue neutral rate and lay it out and see what's the delta and what's the town contribution. And, you know, that's a scenario that I would like to see.
So that's a maintenance of the exact same MSD levels, A and B.
Yeah. And I'd like to avoid surprises year over year. And I also agree with, you know, a 5-year scenario, not a 7-year, because we'll be, you know, be going through this again. And we may be mortgaged in the future by trying to extend 2 years into the financing. But, you know, any other scenarios that council wants or wants to look at?
No.
You don't want me to run anything?
No.
Okay.
That scenario that you just mentioned is backing us into a particular contribution from the town. We don't know exactly what it is.
Right.
That will
Exactly.
come up. So I would agree with that, running that number, but I would also like to see it, you know, notched up give us another factor of contribution by the town, like an extra, because we don't know what it is. But you're projecting it's around 15% or 20 in this in this example B2.
So you want me to run something that is
25.
okay, there you go.
Just to see. I mean, since you're going to be running the numbers.
Well, and that, and that'll obviously the impact of that would be to reduce we wouldn't be doing it from revenue neutral anymore. So you wanted me to run it as revenue neutral with the town contribution, which I'll double check to make sure I'm comfortable with it, but, which I believe is B2, and then you want me to notch it up to 25%.
And see what effect that has on the MSDs.
Okay.
Does everybody agree with the 50-50 on the A and B?
And really, the interest is not going to
Well,
interest wouldn't hit
not
till year
50-50,
three,
is
so.
yeah, and Monica,
That's right, 55-30, right.
yeah, because if our starting point is the MSDs, then we're backing into the 55-30.
I gotcha.
Do you have the previous value of the 109 and the 788?
Yes.
But
Wait,
you don't
when you
have
say
the
previous values,
previous appraised value? Or you don't have that level of detail that you can?
I have to double check.
Well, I guess you could divide 109 into the amount of taxes we've collected and go from there, I guess.
Yeah.
You could probably back into it. Any other direction on that one for Chris? We probably can just have a few more minutes here. If we want to move on to like budgetary accounting, that is basically the bottom line.
And this is another one of your changes where we zero this out.
Yes. But as I'm working, double checking some numbers, that may change. I mean, but
And maybe you could just send us the numbers ahead of time so we have time to kind of digest them a little bit if you have time.
I will endeavor.
Just to digest.
Right. There's a lot of appendices there. I don't know if anybody has any questions. If not, I would just see if anybody has any questions on the CIP, because I know we got the planning board coming in to take over this room shortly.
Not this time.
And I want to emphasize that with the CIP, again, it's a planning document. The only things in it on a year-to-year basis that we are tied to are the debt service. Which some would argue it doesn't even need to be part of a CIP, but I try to put it in there so you all are aware of some of those big factors. Everything else, there's going to be time and opportunities where decisions are made to go forward and how we do that.
Just looking at the CIP, Chris, is there any opportunity, Joe's left the room, is there any opportunity to put in the duck trail in with Phase 4 from the standpoint of looking at doing both projects simultaneously with the same vendor, the same provider, and perhaps some significant savings?
That's what we're going to be trying to do when we bid it out. Joe, the question was when we do the living, for lack of a better term, the Living Shoreline project and the Phase 4 of the PED plan, will we be trying to bid that out to one contractor?
I'm only thinking that, because we want to put more money towards it, could be some savings.
I'm going to say it's probably unlikely because I'm not aware of a firm that does both of those types of projects.
But
We can certainly see if there's something there, but either way, what you would end up with is a company along the lines of Barnhill or RPC that builds roads, subcontracting the other part of it, or vice versa, an environmental services type of contractor who maybe does bulkheads and these types of projects that would have to sub out the sidewalk portion of it. So I'm not aware of a company with the
Didn't RPC
broad enough to do.
Didn't RPC go up and do some of the sidewalks as an overlay after they did Phase 3? Didn't they just go up and do some of that paving? Maybe you don't understand my question, but
yeah,
it seems to me
maybe
either Barnhill or RPC would have the ability to do both, and I'm just saying maybe there's some savings where, going back to Monica's point, we can put some more money towards it and accomplish both with the
Oh, are you talking about the sidewalk?
handling sidewalk.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Sidewalk and
He was
the
asking
trail.
about Living Shore.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What we would likely do is try to leverage that. So we would leverage,
Got it.
what we've done in the past is, we've gotten the linear foot cost as part of the bid, and then then if we felt that was a good enough linear foot cost, then we would amend the contract to include.
Correct. And I guess while I'm standing here, if you're thinking about cost savings in that, within that departmental section, one of the things that may be a possibility, again, it's not necessarily something we can account for in the budget, but as we move forward with the Living Shoreline project, depending on where we end up with the environmental agencies, that project may be further limited in scope as to what it was originally designed and estimated at, and that could result in significant savings. It wouldn't be as substantial a project, but there may be money there. It's not something that we know at this point in time, but just to keep in the back of your mind that that's a possibility as well.
So I think basically we're going to continue the workshop at the next mid-month council meeting. And I don't know if we'll be ready. We may have to have a special meeting to approve the budget based upon what decisions we make and how quickly we can put the ordinance together. Maybe you can do a draft ordinance, and then we can always make changes from the floor. And hopefully
right.
can
We
avoid
only have-
another meeting after 17th. But
Short.
Yeah, we only have next week, right?
Yeah.
Or, or like you say, a continuation of
Yeah.
it or something. But
Yeah. So is there any other business coming before council? Anything else you need to discuss, Chris? With that, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved?
All in favor, please say aye. The one at a time.
Aye.
Mayor says aye. Mayor,
Aye, Monica Thibodeau.
Aye.
Aye, Sandy.
I, Nancy Cavanis.
the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.